Lindsay, and I have kind of twofold questions. The first of which, I'm interested to know, I'm a little bit of an outsider here, coming in from a different breed and discipline. I'm interested to know how you prepare and train horses for the types of lessons with the bareback pad, and it looks like halter bridle or whatever. Is there anything that you go through to prepare horses for that type of lesson? That's kind of my first. How do you know when those horses are ready to do that, is what I'm asking.
I've used 3-year-olds in these kinds of lessons because the students are doing so little.
Right.
That anything that the horse can do, if the horse can stand still and walk with a rider on him, I can put a beginner on him because they're not going to try and do anything. The only thing I do want to make sure is that the horse will stand for mounting. A lot of horses really have a problem with that, and they don't want to stand at the mounting block. They do have to stand for mounting so they don't start walking away because you want them to stand there afterward. Other than that, the bareback pad, if they will wear a saddle, they'll sure wear a bareback pad. The only thing you have to do is to pad the horse enough so that the student's seat bones don't hurt the horse and the horse's backbone doesn't hurt the student.
And are you starting very, very young riders the same way?
Yep.
So like any age?
Any age rider. With a very young rider, what you basically do is you do a little bit more. You keep the lessons, they're very young. I don't really like them much younger than 7.
Right.
And I'd prefer them 9. My experience has been that if you take a rider at 5 and you take a rider at 9, when they're both 11, the 9-year-old will be every bit as good as the one who started at 5 and maybe a little better, because they're more able to deal with their own bodies. But with small children, you do the same lesson over and over again. It's like telling them fairy tales. They like hearing the same fairy tale over and over again. With adults, I give them more intellectual stuff, but still teaching them at the level that they want to go. And I've had very few people be discontented. I've had some children's parents be discontented because watching it is like watching grass grow. But generally speaking, the horses, as I say, since you're not asking them to do all kinds of advanced things, just being sat on bareback is... I'll tell you a quick story about that. Years and years ago, my mother had did some breeding, and we had this yearling that she was keeping standing out in a paddock on the road. And obviously, he'd never been ridden or anything. He was just being handled. And she looked out of the kitchen window one day, and there was this man in the paddock with the yearling with his child. And as she watched, he took the child and put it on the horse. This yearling, and the yearling sort of looked, what the hell is that? But as she came tearing out of the house, and she said, "Sir, would you take your child off my horse, please?" And nothing happened. But the fact that nobody had any feelings about it. I mean, the child was very young, and as you know, children have a feeling for very young children. The horses have a feeling for very young children as well. But you could do something as simple as that, where the child wasn't doing anything. If she clutched the horse and screamed, she probably would have gotten dumped. But since she just sat there, it was okay. Okay, somebody else back there. Yes.
Okay, I'm assuming that you do the work with the pad and the I don't know what you call it, but
neck strap.
Neck strap at the trot and the canter too.
We do it at the walk and trot, and then when they're really good at the walk and trot, we go into the saddle and we work them in the saddle and get now they're ready to use the stirrups. So they start to learn to use the stirrups and then do the half seat and so forth. And then later on we go back to the canter. The difference is that we walk and trot. So those gaits are in our bodies. The people who were here last year, remember I said that we are born to ride. It's programmed into our bodies because the motion of the horse is exactly the same as the motion that our legs give us, which is why you can do, why they have therapeutic riding, particularly for people with strokes that read patterns. Unfortunately, we don't canter because we can't rest, we can't go with just one front leg on the ground. However, it's still there. I I have seen toddlers canter. You know, they're hurrying and they'll do this thing with their arms. Side stroke, which is the easiest swimming stroke, is actually canter. So it's there, but you have to revive that, and the student really needs to be very centered lateral. The other thing about the canter is it has a lateral thing and a longitudinal thing to deal with. So you've got to be very centered both laterally and longitudinally before you can deal with the canter. Yes?
How do you motivate the horse? Is it on the lunge line or when you're doing the trot work? Or in the
Before they're turned loose?
Yeah, when you're using the round pen and the neck strap. How do you jog with them or you
I run.
Run, okay.
Short, when I get tired, we stop. And then there comes a period where when they are really secure at the walk and the jog, I put them in a small space like a round pen and turn them loose. And I get them, and then before I turn them loose, I teach them first on the ground and then on the horse how to use the stick. Like a la Linda Tellington-Jones, that team thing where you touch and then wait and touch and then wait, and the horse, and learn how the horse responds. And if the horse reacts without necessarily trotting, you don't hit him any harder. He heard you, so you just have to figure out how to explain to him what it is you want. But hitting, you don't back the horse so hard that he bucks. So when they can center laterally and longitudinally at the walk and the trot, I turn them loose with a stick, and then we teach them to steer with their center, to become passive, to use your eyes, your voice, the stick, your center, and your weight.
No reins at that point.
No reins. Because you can't use the reins until you're really balanced. And so why let everybody develop bad habits to make the horse mad? And then there becomes a moment where we start using reins, and I always used hackamores, what they call it, the Western people call it, what the English people call a Western hackamore. It's a very short shanked hackamore with a fuzzy nose and usually a fuzzy chin, so you can't make the horse do anything with it. You can't hurt him. So if they don't do it right, the horse doesn't listen. And so on. Somebody else? Yes.
Gincy, the only, I had one question that I keep running into. Some of my favorite students are quite large, and some of my favorite and best lesson horses are quite low-backed, although they're also substantial. And I was wondering how you would address the situation where it seems that because they're a beginner and they're quite large, they're quite unbalanced, and they're coming onto the horse with the bareback pad. It seemed like when I just took the stirrups off the saddle, it was the only way I could successfully try to model what I had learned from you. So I was wondering how you would address that with the bareback pad and the larger beginner.
Yeah, that is. I'm glad you brought that up, because that is a separate problem. If you have somebody that's very large, then they have a very high center of gravity. You got a lot of weight up here and a very high center of gravity, and usually the legs don't go down easily because of the weight. And that's the only occasion where I will give them a stirrup, and I'll bring the stirrup up to whatever length, so they can use the stirrup for lateral grounding.
But you stayed with the saddle, the bareback pad?
I don't even, no, I use the saddle with the stirrups, and so they can use the stirrups for lateral grounding because they have to.
Okay, thanks.
And then at some point, when they have begun to figure out how to move their center back and forth, then I can put them on the bareback pad and make sure that it's well padded because of the horse and so on like that. But yeah, that is the one instance when you have somebody with a really high center of gravity that just can't control their center well enough. Then they've got to, because the stirrups, one of the big things you use stirrups for is for lateral control. I mean, you could see that in that cowboy thing where he was using the stirrups to bring his lateral balance.
It seemed to me that in addition to just, even if I didn't use those stirrups, but I just used a saddle, it dispersed their weight a little bit better when they landed, because I literally had horses that were going like this with the bareback pad when I was trying to model. So I went ahead and used a saddle, but I took the stirrups off because I was still trying to model what I had learned from you. But do you feel it would be better to just put the stirrups on the saddle and then go back to the bareback?
Yeah, I would. Yeah, I think so. You put the stirrups on the saddle and let them use the stirrups till they get their centering. If they're so heavy that they're pressing the horse down, then you probably do need to use the saddle, because the saddle will distribute the weight.
Yeah. Okay.
They don't, when I was teaching,
Thank
the
you.
obesity problem had not arisen yet. So,
Thank you.
yes.
Where do you get your bareback pads?
Well, I've made them up for years. I would get a regular Western, heavy Western pad, and then use that well, on the bottom I would put cotton, we got cotton thermal blankets. I think we got twin size, and if you fold them just right, you can just keep turning them over for a week, and then you throw them in the laundry. Because you get this thing with those Western pads is they're impossible to wash. So, yeah. Yeah, that's what Kim has created. We're just talking about, which is a good, that's another thing. It's not the one I use because I didn't have that kind of pad. I'm not even sure they made them then. I haven't had it in my own place for.
That's a Western pad with felt, like a 1-inch felt pad underneath an English pad, because the English one had the girth keepers to run the girth through, and the billet guards to hook the breastplate up to.
Right. I would do the cotton thermal underneath, so you had something you could wash, and then a Western pad, which is usually pretty thick, and then depending on the horse's needs, maybe one of those closed cell foam pads, and finally an English pad on top, so that you got the breast straps for the straps for the yeah. See, the breast collar goes to the strap here for that would normally go over the billet, and then the girth, having the surcingle thing here keeps the girth thing here, it keeps the surcingle, keeps the pad from sliding back.
So it's a surcingle holding the whole apparatus together.
Yeah, and it's a very easy way to make surcingles rather than buying them. I mean, if you don't want to go out, I mean, it's nice to buy them, but if you take your horse's regular girth and take a pair of stirrup leathers, you lace them in, starting on the off side, you lace them so that you have the two buckles together. The buckle, the stirrup leather buckle and the girth buckle, and the stirrup leather through the girth buckle up over the horse, and then you buckle it to the girth on the other side.
You can see it here.
You can see it here.
So the two stirrup leathers go up through one side of the girth, and they go across the back of the horse, and they buckle in on the other side. You have to use 1-inch stirrup leathers, because that's the size of the buckles. And you either need a loop to hook your breastplate to, or got a girth that's got a ring on it.
The other side has buckles, right?
Yep.
So the girth has buckles on both sides.
Right.
So you've got this.
That's the stirrup. You can't.
You can just see the edge of it here. This is where the stirrup leather is going through the girth buckle.
So you took the buckles off?
No, you just take the buckle for the girth.
Right.
You take your stirrup leather and you feed it into the buckle
The girth
until it locks against the other.
Until the two buckles are together.
Buckles lock.
Until the two buckles are together. Then you take the strap across and buckle it to the other girth buckle on the inside, but you do have to use 1-inch leathers because girths only come in 1 inch. And stirrup leathers come in all kinds of things. But that way you can try it and you haven't invested a lot of money, and you can use the horse's own girth on him, and just
Regular surcingles don't really work usually because of the padding that they put up at the top to keep them from shifting.
you have to,
That interferes with
unless you can get
the
to flat surcingles, they don't work, but this works really nicely. And,
This actually.
And then you just regular breastplate to hook up to those.
And then you can run your balance rope both sides.
Did you put the ropes like that on the overhead?
Yeah, we create this. This is actually what she used rope. I used to use split reins, the braided nylon split reins, which we used to be able to get very cheaply. And it just starts on one side, starts on the off side, comes over here, goes through a ring, goes through this ring, goes through a little ring there to hold it, and goes back into the middle and then back to the other side. It's adjustable. They both have to be adjustable. You use Conway buckles.
A couple of snaps, ring snaps and some Conway buckles, and it's fully adjustable.
Yeah, they're fully adjustable, and you can see you can put different horses. And then these breastplates have a snap on the end, so it goes to the ring on the girth. If you don't, you can have some of the breastplates. You can just add a strap or something. We are looking into getting a girth, a pad that you can pad up. Put shims in on either side, because a lot of the older horses particularly aren't very level. And I would like to be able to add like a quarter sheet and a hood to it in the winter, because one of the reasons that horses buck in the winter is because of cold. And if you're doing beginners and not going out there and galloping around right away, if you put something on to keep the horse warm. When I started doing that, the foals went from 5 a day to 1 a month. So it was really quite nice. That's why people go take their horses to Florida.
A Mattis pad. M-A-T-T-E-S, Mattis pad.
I don't know those for those.
They're a product you can get from County Saddles, but you put shims inside the back of the pad, and the sheep's head on one side. So you can shims on the front of the pad.
Yeah.
Very expensive.
Yeah, they are.
But they are. That's what we're going to try to model after, but trying to find something at price point.
Sure, and I've seen one
Duct tape and
like
same
this
thing.
that has an open Velcro pocket that you can put shims in.
Yeah.
It's not as expensive as that. That's just
I would like
just
to.
pad with
Yeah.
shim spaces.
Yeah. I would like this pad to be a little bit bigger, because sometimes if you get somebody that's heavy and or the horse is wide, their knee is going to be up much higher. This lady has a nice loose soft thigh, and so her leg is very straight. But your average beginner is not going to be able to have their legs just aren't going to sit there. They're going to have to come out here, because their legs aren't going to stretch that much. So they're going to have to. They're better off if the pad comes a little more forward. But you can get very ingenious if you have people that want to do it and you don't have a lot of money to spend, so you get creative. Okay. Anybody else?
Just another nice thing about that for beginners, a lot of people come in, they're not sure if their kids are going to want to continue this, they don't want to spend a huge amount of money. You're starting off like this, they don't have to have good boots.
They don't have to have anything except comfortable clothes and a pair of shoes that will stay on, and because they're not going to have their feet in their stirrups, so they don't have to make any big investment. And most stables have hatched along to start with, and then they go from there, and that way they get a chance to get started and get to like it before they have to spend money. So that's a good thing. Yes?
Do any students ever complain about their legs hurting from not having
No,
hanging for so long?
No, you know what we do with them though? Glad you brought that one up too, because when they first get, it's not so much the hanging, because they can sit on bar stools, right? It's not so much the hanging, it's the having their legs out around the horse. So what we will do is we have an exercise which we use for a lot of other things called knees up. If you have them bring their knee up, right up to here, and just sit with it that way. And that is, incidentally, that is also a great exercise to help somebody find their seat bones. You hang their knees up there, and it's like, oh, Yes.
There's an exercise that I was taught when I was a tadpole called up, out, and down, and that's what you do with your knees.
Yeah. I know the one where you're up and this
Yeah,
way.
up and down. And we had to learn how to do that on a walk and a trot and canter and bareback.
I read in one book where that guy had people going around the world at the canter. That was a little much. But anyway, what happens is the inner thigh gets tired, and if you just have them bring their knees up, and I try to remember to do that when they're staying on the horse for any time, just to have them bring their knees up and run.
Would it also be good if you started beginners or any riders, would it be good to sometimes just go back to that with their hands and just proceed?
We used to,
We're already riding this out.
well, we used to, my stable was down in Connecticut, which doesn't get horrible in the winter, but it does get cold. And we would ride bareback all winter. It's warmer. Everybody's warmer. And, if somebody was going to go to a winter show, then we would get back in the saddles, but everybody rode. And the advanced students really enjoyed it because they could get back and do stuff that they wanted to work on, but in the summer they're doing this, that, and the other thing. So if they were riding, if they weren't doing much, like a beginner class, we just put the pads right on over the blankets. Stable's 50 degrees, the barn is, the indoor ring is 20 degrees. So you put the pads on over the blankets, and it's not very classy looking, but it does keep the horses warm. Everybody stays on, so. Anybody else? I see some yawning, so I think maybe that's it's the hour, not the company. You have been a wonderful audience. Thank you so much. And I'm sorry I can't come to the rest of the festivities. I haven't packed anything yet. I'm leaving on Sunday at noon. And I'm not even sure what you take to Arizona. You're of one sort or another. And when I speak of everyone, I'm not necessarily referring to a group lesson. Even in a private lesson, there are always at least 3 of you. The instructor, the student, and of course that most important, the individual, the horse. All 3 are subject to fear, but there are many different aspects of fear involved. Let's begin with the student, since we are most accustomed to thinking about her fears. The most obvious one is fear of the horse himself, found most often in beginners, but I have seen it in more advanced riders and even some instructors. Then there's the fear of being on the horse, which is not the same thing. It is more like claustrophobia because the student feels trapped on the horse, very much like having climbed a tree and then finding yourself unable to figure out how to get down safely. Closely related to this, but again not quite the same, is the fear of falling. Next is the fear of losing control. This is found in students at nearly all levels except the most advanced. It may be similar to our experience driving cars or riding bikes. If you lose control of the car or the bike, you are virtually certain to get into an accident of some sort. Even though this is by no means true on the horse, your body reacts as though it was. These are physical fears, that is, fear of physical harm. But there are other fears as well, more on the psychological or emotional and intellectual level. The first is fear of failure. But there's also fear of embarrassment, of looking stupid or incompetent, of doing the wrong thing. In some more advanced riders, fear of losing control is psychological rather than physical. They feel that if the horse is not doing exactly what they want, it reflects on their skills as riders. It is these fears, as much or more than the physical ones, that should influence our approach to teaching. In many cases, there is fear of the instructor. Some instructors use fear as a teaching tool. I have worked under instructors who seem to feel that if at least one student in the lesson didn't burst into tears, the lesson didn't challenge them enough. Now, some years ago, I read an article that stated that it had been shown scientifically that if fear could be entirely eliminated from the learning process, learning increased exponentially in terms of speed of learning. I was unable to find this source, but by putting fear and learning into my search engine, I came up with a number of sites that approach improving learning from this point of view. One of them, Learning Without Fear, makes the following statement. The LWF method was developed to eliminate the primary barriers to student learning. Fear, lack of student self-confidence. It lists several more that are not relevant to this program, but notice that they put fear at the head of the list and in their title. So it follows that if an instructor uses fear as a teaching tool, she's actually making her job many, many times more difficult. Now let's move on to the horse. A lot of his physical fears are based on previous experience. If he expects to be ridden badly, and my definition of bad riding is simply riding in a way that is uncomfortable for the horse in any way. He fears the physical pain of having his back pounded on and his mouth hauled on while struggling to keep his balance as the rider wobbles all over him. He may also have unsoundnesses that cause constant discomfort and may go unrecognized, or we call it laziness, or stubbornness, or an attitude problem. These in turn can lead to fear of outright physical abuse with whips, spurs, and severe bits. And no, I'm not one of those people who feels that whips and spurs should be outlawed. I merely feel that the word aid applied to these objects means to help. So if they aren't making the horse's task easier in some way, they are being applied incorrectly. And the horse too has emotional fears. His most common fear is the fear of being left out of the loop, not being considered and not allowed any input, which is usually the instructor's fault, and again, I'm as guilty as anyone. Most of the time during the lesson we focus on the student, and often the only time we pay attention to the horse is when he misbehaves, that is, doesn't respond in the way that we wanted. Think of yourself in a situation where you're sitting with two other people. They are having a conversation that directly concerns you, and they totally ignore you and exclude you from the conversation, even as they talk about you and move you around. This is more an attitude problem on our part than anything, and needs to be thought about. Horses, like us, need to feel some degree of control over the situation at any given moment. The control can either be in their own hands or in the hands of someone they trust to look after them. Here's the horse saying, no, I'm not sure I want to listen to you. I had an eye-opening experience some years ago. I was working with a student who was an instructor herself and was training a young horse for one of her students. We wanted to take him out on the trail, so the horse owner loaned me her other horse, a bomb-proof animal that she regularly trail rode with her husband. We went out to a large field about a mile away and were working around it at the walk and trot with the student leading. Her horse was going very well, so we started working at a controlled hand gallop. Again, he performed extremely well in the lead, so we decided to see how he would do following. I took the lead, and the first thing my horse did was to spook. Not really badly, so I just set him on, and we continued to work, first at the trot and then at the hand gallop. My horse spooked several more times, but each time I ignored it and continued to work with my student and her horse. We finished our work successfully and started back toward home. After a minute or two, I relaxed and let the reins run and turned in my saddle to talk to her, at which point my horse exploded, spun, and dumped me as hard as he could. Fortunately, I've had a lifetime of experience in falling, so I was more surprised than hurt, and the horse didn't run home. I think maybe he was just standing there laughing. Well, I thought about that for a while. I thought about the horse. One of the things I had noticed about him was that he had a very hard eye. No milk of equine kindness there. So I decided that maybe he had never learned to trust humans and had no doubt been forced into the bomb-proof mode. I suspected, which I've run into before, that he didn't like experienced riders because they could make him do things he didn't want to do. So I decided to work with him on the ground to teach him how to be comfortable with being the leader. I won't tell you the whole story, but the first time I took him out in hand, walking back by his center so that he was the leader, he stopped short about 15 feet from the barn door, and it took me 20 minutes to gently convince him that he could safely walk ahead of me another 10 feet where he could eat some grass as a reward. I worked with him for 2 months while cautioning his owner not to put him in situations where he had to lead. At that point, he seemed to have gained a lot of confidence and a lot of trust, and his eye was much softer, so I stopped. A few months after that, she took him to an indoor facility for the winter. We went over to ride one day, and the barn owners had put some very frightening structures at the far end of the arena. I was riding the young horse, and his owner was riding my spooky friend. I told her to leave her reins alone and just ask him to keep walking. After about 10 minutes at the safe end of the arena, my horse, her horse, my spooky buddy, on his own, with my horse following, worked his way up to the scary place, inspected it carefully, and thereafter ignored it while we finished the lesson. So I learned that by giving the horse the control he needed, I restored his confidence and our trust in each other. Now we come to the instructor. As far as physical fears are concerned, there are a lot of instructors out there who are afraid to ride their own horses. They will cheerfully put a bold student on a horse they wouldn't dream of getting on themselves. Most of those students take it as a compliment at first, but after a few nasty falls, it begins to lose some of its appeal. And it certainly does not create an atmosphere of trust. Emotional fears are not at all uncommon among instructors. We worry about keeping our students happy and feeling successful. We feel insecure about being able to provide the right answer in each situation. Riding is a very complex sport both to understand and to teach, which is why so many books have been written about it. And we often run into situations where the student or the horse can't perform the task and we aren't really sure why. We may feel insecure about our standing in the profession, especially if we work at a stable where instructors compete for the students. And most of us feel insecure about money. How does fear manifest itself? Let's talk just briefly about how emotions work. Emotions arise initially, not in our brains, but in our bodies. The body responds to messages it gets through the senses and reacts accordingly. Then your brain realizes something's going on. But your conscious brain has no direct control over this. There's literally no connection at all between your conscious brain and the part of the brain where emotions originate. There is a way to control it, which we'll talk about a little later, but rationalization doesn't work at all. In other words, telling your student to relax when she is tense is a frustrating waste of time. The second thing we need to know is something that you already know as centered riding instructors. I don't know what you're calling it now, but I call it muscular telepathy. Bodies talk to other bodies. I've used this simile before, but some of you may not have heard it. A flock of birds is flying along, and suddenly they all turn almost simultaneously and shoot off in a different direction. Now you know that the first bird didn't say to the second bird, when we're over that maple tree, I'm going to turn right and go up 50 feet. Pass it on. Of course not. All the birds' bodies respond to what the nearby birds are doing. Horses in the herd do the same thing. It's an important part of herd dynamics. This is what keeps them from crashing into each other, among other things. And it is interspecies. In other words, your body and the horse's body and your students' bodies are all talking to each other at the same time. Among other things, that may explain why riding with intent helps so much. Now, since emotions occur in the body, they can be transmitted as well, and they are. That may explain the horses smell your fear myth. They may or may not smell it, but they do experience it. How do we recognize fear? It's not always obvious. Fear has a bad reputation in our culture. It often meets with responses like, chicken, or get over it, rather than with the help and understanding necessary to guide the person through the problem. As a result, people often try to disguise their fear by pretending to be braver or smarter than they really feel. what you might call false confidence. They brag about their experience, but somehow never get around to demonstrating their skills. Then there's another aspect. I was listening to a talk by a non-com who trains enthusiastic new recruits. He said that whenever he brought up a problem that he was going to teach them how to solve, their first reaction was, "No problem, we can do that, it's easy." So then he would explain what they should do and send them off to do it. They would take off full of apparent confidence, but within a very short time they would be back saying, "Could you just explain that again, sir? We didn't quite get it." That is misplaced confidence. They think they can because they don't know enough to realize that they can't. That too is something we all tend to do a little bit without realizing it until we find ourselves lost in the woods. If the student is mounted, fear will always show up in her position as tension, sometimes very obvious, sometimes subtle. One of the reasons why we need to study good writing is so that we can detect small tensions which usually lead to larger errors. On this one, there's just, if you look, there's a little tension. Right down through here and in her arms, there's a little tension, a little some up in here, in her jaw. And the horse, he's got his head up. I look a little tense. So you can see that, we're all kind of not quite comfortable. A very common cover-up for fear is aggression. So much so, this was a horse that was afraid of having people come into his stall. So much so that it is universally true that aggression is always the result of feeling threatened in some way. The advanced rider who feels insecure when the horse isn't behaving perfectly may become very aggressive with him, not because it works, but because it serves as an outlet for her fears. Truly secure people and horses don't have to be aggressive. Of course, being aggressive rarely works because, like all emotion, it creates a responding and similar emotion in the other individual, which might be either a person or a horse. In other words, being aggressive makes those around you aggressive as well, unless they are very secure. The aggression can appear in many guises, as being rough on the horse, or being bossy with other students, or being a know-it-all. In any case, the greater the aggression, the greater the fear behind it. On the other side, you might find timidity. But excessive timidity, the refusal to try anything the least bit challenging, is actually passive-aggressive. I can be afraid if I want to, and you can't stop me, so there. I had a little Girl Scout once when I had Girl Scout groups come, and all the other kids got on the horse right away, and she said, "I'm not getting on that horse." So I said, "Okay, fine, you can go sit over there." So all the other kids got on, and then after everybody ignored him, and she realized that everybody else was fine on the horse, then she came over and got on. But it was definitely, she was going to be in control until she decided. Then there are the students who talk all the time, and those who don't talk at all. The ones who, if you say, "Do you have any questions?" they will say, "Nope," or just shake their heads. But when they start to perform the task, it immediately becomes obvious that they don't have a clue. This needs to be addressed during the lesson, so we'll discuss it later. There is one indicator that is common to every fear situation. Being around someone who is afraid makes you feel uncomfortable. It might be quite subtle, but it's there. Kind of like being on a horse who hasn't actually done anything yet, but you know not to let down your guard. Whether it's tension, aggressiveness, nervousness, doesn't make any difference. At some level, each of you is going to pick up on it, and it will affect your behavior as well. If the rider is fearful, the horse may become tense and spooky, and the instructor may become more aggressive. If the instructor is unsure, the horse may stop at the fence instead of jumping it, and the rider may fall off because she has become tense and lost her centering. If the horse is tense, the rider may become grippy, and the instructor may start talking too much and too fast. The physical reaction that is associated with fear is being transmitted from one to another. We have a way of blocking this out, which I'll cover in a minute, but it's good to cultivate the awareness. Fear, aggression, and like emotions are by no means the only emotions that can be transmitted. Emotions such as happiness and confidence, I love this picture, are also passed from one to another. Those emotions make us feel stronger and more secure, and we can use them to help our students. If you have been teaching long enough and have been lucky, you have had school horses that were gentle, kindly, and almost unflappable. You can put the tensest beginner on them and in a short time see their fear begin to melt away. Similarly, there are riders who can do that for the tensest horse. My late husband was such a person. Horses that bolted or bucked or had any sort of behavioral problem just never seemed to do it when he was aboard. He never did anything obvious about it. He just seemed to expect that everything would go well, and it always did. What those great school horses had, and what Buck had, was deep self-confidence. Not arrogance, not pride, just an aura of security and a feeling that they would and could take care of you. Now, you might think that this is some sort of magical quality that you have to be born with. And certainly it helps if it comes to you naturally. But there is also a way to create it in yourself. Since emotions originate in the body, we can create them consciously with a little practice. First, I'm going to demonstrate a couple of emotions, and you can see if you recognize them. So we all recognize those things consciously and unconsciously. Now I'm going to show you the way to create confidence in your own body. It's called the 7 steps, and probably at least some of you know about them. But it wouldn't hurt to stand up and stretch anyway, after all that eating, which we'll do in just a second. Just a second. Just so that those of you who know this won't be totally bored stiff, I have something a little different for you to think about. If you go to upscale horse shows much, where there are very good horses and riders, you can pretty much tell when a horse enters the ring how he's going to do. There's a sort of there's that same aura of confidence which you see in top human athletes as well. So instead of thinking about yourselves as we go through the 7 steps, I'd like you to think about how a centered, grounded, confident horse looks and moves, and how that feels in your bodies. Okay, you can stand up now, but instead of stretching on your own, let's do it together and think about being a horse. So here you are, a horse warming up. First you have to stretch. Like a human, you do the flexor muscles first, starting with your stiffer side, which is the left side for most people, unless if you're looking at me, so it makes you backwards. But the left side on most people is the stiffer side. And so you stretch that side, and then don't forget to do your head and neck, because if you were a horse, you'd be stretching your head and your neck. And the horse will run over his head up for a while, and maybe you twist off to one side, work it around, and then you do the other side. Get everything on that side. Really good. That's usually kind of a long period of the horse going around, galloping with his head up and so forth. And then after he's stretched, and some horses will do it to walk, some horses will trot, some horses, and then they gradually work into a canter, and they get all stretched out. And then they start sort of loosening up all over. Oh, that first one was called grow, much to your surprise. The second one is shake out. Maybe you scoot or you buck, and maybe you feel all loose. You stretch down. Close enough, it takes me about a half an hour to get down. Shake out loud. Maybe you roll. If you're a horse, you might go down and roll at this point. You don't have to do that one. And you blow out. And incidentally, probably most of you know this, but when the horse blows out, it is the indicator that his flexor muscles are relaxed. They don't blow out until, if you have a horse that never blows out, he just hasn't released all these muscles. And your eyes get soft. And you start to engage your hindquarters so you can become centered longitudinally. So you kind of rock back and forth a little bit and get your hindquarters engaged. Mine engaged a little more than I'd like. And you begin to get your balance on the turns as your body loosens up. So you first bend to the right to get that left hind leg over where it belongs. And then you get to the left. You look for a nice even curve so you don't fall into your forehand. And finally you drop down into a nice free-flowing walk. And into a nice balanced halt. And you ground. You should find it at this point very easy to ground. I'm going to look on your toes a little bit. You've released all your tensions and you're ready to go to work with confidence. Now don't sit down yet, because we can sit down. I cannot overemphasize the importance of teaching the 7 steps to your students in the very first lesson, repeating it several times in every lesson for a long time, and encouraging them to use it in all aspects of their lives. I know when I have an e-group of people who follow this kind of thing, and they all use it, and a lot of them swear by it. And when I lost my husband of 37 years, one of them wrote to me and said, "Have you thought about doing the 7 steps to help you?" And I did, and it did help. It was just, you know, that whole thing of just getting rid of all those hidden tensions that you sometimes don't even know you have. With practice, one can go from tension to confidence in a few seconds as the body learns the pattern and does it automatically. The first time your body responds to a spook or a sudden movement all by itself by centering and grounding instead of rolling up into a ball and holding on the bit is about as confidence building an experience as anything you can imagine. Now this is such a great picture. This guy has not got the most beautiful build for riding that you ever saw. Because he's got a very long, heavy upper body and stuff like that. If you look at his centering, see where his left foot is way down there, and there's his right foot. He's really loose. There's nothing tight in here at all. He's not hanging on with his thighs. His weight is down. He's really grounded in both feet. And he's going to stay over that horse when he steals. He is really beautifully centered over that horse. It looked like once that horse could do every once in a while, that's going to be there. And the horse is going to be comfortable. The horse isn't thinking about him at all. The horse doesn't have to think about him. He knows he's okay. Now, slight change of subject if you're while you're all still standing up. People used to come to my farm to see about lessons, and they would see a lot of students riding on bareback pads, and almost everybody except pretty advanced riders using a neck strap. Some of the onlookers who had ridden before would be, "Oh, weird, what's with this?" And some of my fellow instructors in the area kind of sneered at the whole concept. But as long as my riders were comfortable and happy, and those that liked competition did as well or better at shows than their students, it didn't bother me. I have very good reasons for both. I'm going to let you find out what they are, starting with the neck straps. Whenever we are learning something new that requires balance, we need to use our hands to help us. We hold on to things or we wave our arms around in the air. Think of riding a bicycle, think of skiing or ice skating or walking a tightrope or riding a unicycle. You've got to use those hands. If we can't do that, we stay tense, and it's much harder, if not impossible, to learn the skill. So, if you could each find a partner and face each other, holding hands lightly. If you can't find anybody, you can use the chair or a table. Okay, now just hold hands lightly. Now, one of you stand on one foot. One of you stand on one foot and use your partner's hand to help you. You shouldn't have to pull hard unless you really lose your balance badly. Now, if you've gotten your balance on one foot, now the next thing to do is to close your eyes. The person who's balancing, close your eyes. Now stay on one foot and let go of your partner's hands. If you're really good, you can do it. Now, okay, the other person can take the turn.
Pretty good. Yeah.
Try the 11.
Stand with your eyes open.
Now, if you pass that challenge, try it on tiptoe. One foot on tiptoe. And then eyes open and eyes closed.
Because I don't want to stay there. Doesn't want to stay there.
Now I want you to notice how, for the most part, you don't have to hold on hard. You don't have to, it's just, it's not hanging on for dear life, it's just having that light touch is all you need. It doesn't do any good to hang on really hard and pull.
But even if you don't,
Okay. Now, last step in this little game here. Still holding hands. Both of you stand on one foot. I would do the opposite foot probably. Whichever one. And you can stand on one foot or not. And see how you use each other, and think about grounding on the foot that's on the ground. And how you can use each other's hands. Each of you has to keep your... Now what you're doing is that one of you is being the horse and the other is the rider, so you have to keep a very soft following hand. You can't get your, if you make your arms rigid, it's not going to work. I was going to say, I was watching you two, you're good. Yeah, you guys were good.
I just feel like I'm just centered, though.
So, anyway, that's the way the reins are supposed to work. You and the horse must assist. Must assist, but never interfere with each other to stay balanced and grounded. And the student learns this. In other words, she learns how to ride the horse on the bit because of her work on the neck strap. Because you don't when you work with the neck strap, you don't hang on it or haul on it. You just use it with that light field of balance. She also learns the following hand because the neck strap follows the movement of the horse's shoulders. And since we teach riders to keep a light, steady, even pressure on both hands on the neck strap, her hands learn to follow. So she's learning all this stuff that is going to help her riding. It keeps her grounded, and it's going to eventually help the horse. Meanwhile, she's not hanging on his face. Now for the bareback pad. I'll do this when you guys are getting tired. But so, well, I don't know if you can see me or not. But why do we use a bareback pad? Why do we start students, or what do I start students on a bareback pad? If I'm on the ground here and I bend a little forward, and I'll tell you what I'm going to do, and squeeze my buttock and thigh muscles really hard, like a beginner on a horse. So I'm standing here and squeezing, and when I squeeze, what happens is my heels come up. I completely lose my grounding. And so, therefore, it follows. A saddle is mostly a device, just a device for holding stirrups, so that they don't turn when you step on one side. That's why saddles were invented. So you could throw a spear off a horse and not fall off. As we know, you keep your feet in the stirrups not by pushing on them, which would push them forward, but by allowing the weight of your legs to fall down and ground on the stirrups. In order to do this, your entire leg structure, starting from the lower back, must be free of tension. This does not happen with beginners or with more advanced riders if fear of being on the horse is not dealt with in the early lessons. Therefore, there is no point in giving a student stirrups until she has developed a relaxed seat without them. And since saddles are flat and slippery, the well-designed bareback pad is a much better choice for developing a good seat. And it said they were working on a design for a bareback pad that can be shimmed to make it level on the horse and keep it off her spine. So that's something we're working on. So that's why we do neck straps and bareback pads. And they really have a legitimate reason, and particularly that whole business of developing the seat before you give them the stirrups. Now let's talk about the actual lesson itself. In terms of fear, the first lesson is by far the most important. First impressions affect your body's perception for a long time, probably forever. For the beginning student, it will be her first impression of riding, of horses, and of you. The whole experience will be new, and therefore exciting. And furthermore, if she weren't interested in horses and riding, she wouldn't be there in the first place. There is no need to try and make it interesting by having her do more on the horse than she is ready for. What you want to do is to build her trust and positive expectation. Think of it. Trust and positive expectation. This photo is not of somebody in her first lesson, but it's the place where you're going. This is the same girl we saw earlier who was a bit tense, and obviously she's pretty comfortable right now. Don't make the mistake of thinking that just because your student looks forward to riding at an advanced level that she wants to try it today. Imagine if you took your first skiing lesson and they took you up to the top of the mountain as soon as you learned to put your skis on. What can you say to build her positive expectations? That is her expectation of eventual success for riding. You can tell her that riding is not a difficult sport in the sense that it requires any great athletic ability. Anyone who can sit normally can ride normally and can continue riding well into old age. See? I've known two people, one a woman in her 80s who took over after the death of her husband, and another a man in his 90s who were still masters of foxhounds and hunted regularly. Many physically handicapped people ride very successfully. A lifetime of riding can be fun for anyone because there's so many different ways to enjoy horses once you have learned the basic skills. Then you can go on to talk about the horse and her relationship with him. One of the big problems with competition today, and if you are American Riding Instructor Association members, you read about this in the last winter's issue. The big problems with competition today, especially at the upper levels, is that riders have not been taught to care about the horse. So rather than learning to ride in the way that's best for the horse, they often are only concerned in riding to win. Now this picture, I think, is absolutely beautiful. This is Bill Steinkraus. And if you look at that, he is riding so perfectly. And look at the horse. He's so obvious that the horse is being left alone to do his thing, and he realizes that Bill is there to help him. It's just the way it should be. And it's just an obvious, look at the reins, by the way. The way they just loop down. And, wait a minute, let me get this button working again. You can see that he's centered over his stirrups, and centered over his stirrups, and his center is just, here's the horse's center, and his center is just a little bit behind it where it should be. And it's just absolutely amazing.
It's complete harmony.
Yeah. Harmony, physical and emotional. I mean, it's physical, intellectual, and emotional harmony. They're just really together. I think one of our jobs when we start a rider is to help her to see that if you think about the first goal, that is riding in a way that is best for the horse, the second, riding to win, will come much more easily for both rider and horse. You could explain that while anybody, that's anybody, can learn to ride reasonably well, you have to proceed very slowly, especially at first, because until you get comfortable and balanced, it's very easy to develop bad habits. I'm fond of saying that people spend 10 years trying to unlearn what they learned in the first 10 lessons. Somebody was talking earlier about a book that they had read about a woman who had all these horrendous lessons, and there's a lot of it around. And more important, it's very hard on the horse. What you want her to learn about the horse is that he wants to be a kind and loving individual, but she must treat him with kindness, consideration, and respect. That, especially in the beginning, she should listen to him and not try to tell him what to do, because he obviously knows more about the subject than he does. Kid, that's wonderful. I do not ever ask any student to try to control a horse at all until they've had a number of lessons. Either I myself or an experienced assistant acts as leader during that period. That means they lead the horse in and out of the barn, they lead when she's riding. And there are always plenty of older kids and even some adults who want to learn more who are willing to act as helpers in return for extra riding or lessons. Even when the student has the necessary experience, I would far rather have her ask the horse to perform a task than try to tell him. If the horse is unwilling, I want her to know the cause so that we can help him rather than just bullying her way through it. She will also become a much better rider as a result of this approach. All of this will be building your students' trust and respect for you as well. You are establishing your knowledge of your subject. And don't ever be afraid to say, I don't know. It shows a greater understanding of the complexities of riding than pretending you know it all. Because none of us does, that's for sure. You are also showing you that you are a caring and considerate person both of horses and of other people. This gives the student the confidence that you are concerned with her comfort and safety. Now this conversation can be taking place while you're fitting your helmet, walking to the barn, or perhaps looking into the stall. And by the way, I haven't forgotten about safety. I just think it's important to emphasize the positive qualities of the horse first. Many people's sole knowledge of the horse is that he kicks and bites. Right? If the student has some, or even a lot, of previous experience, she still gets about the same introduction, but is preceded by the caveat that, while I realize that she has experience, there is so much to know about horses that no one can know it all, and I need to be sure that we're both starting from the same page. I might add that I have never had anyone refuse to do this or be anything except interested. Now we come to the lesson itself, what we could call the implementation of the expectation. The purpose of giving a lesson is to communicate information. But that's a two-way street. If I say, ici un cheval blanc, il s'appelle Charlie, il est très gentil and vous l'aimerez. I will be saying something that is relevant, but I probably won't be communicating with most of you. Maybe with none of you, because neither my French nor my French accent's that good. What I said was, this is Brown Horse, his name is Charlie, he's very nice and you will love him. The point being that I must communicate in a way that you can understand and use. Talking about hocks and pasterns in the first lesson doesn't cut it. There are two mistakes we make other than not speaking the language. The first is saying too little, the second is saying too much. To illustrate the first, Amy, a student, came to me after having ridden for several months at another stable and become frightened and discouraged. She described her first experience there as follows. She had informed him, when she arranged for her first lesson, that she had literally never even been close to a horse before. When she arrived for the lesson, a fully tacked up horse was brought out with stirrups slid up the leathers and placed at the mounting block. The instructor held the horse and said to Amy, "Get on." Just that. Nothing more. Amy looked things over, grabbed the saddle, swung her leg over, and sort of hopped on. The instructor promptly bowled her out for not pulling down the stirrups. Huh? Stirrups? What's that? It's a true story. The other extreme is the instructor who leads the horse to the mounting block, and the conversation, mostly one-sided, goes as follows. Instructor: okay, first you pull down the stirrups, then you pick up the reins and put your right hand on the pommel, then you take your stirrup in your left hand and turn it towards you and put your left foot in it, but not too far, then you grab the horse's mane in your left hand, then you stand up in the stirrup and get your balance and swing your right foot over and put it in the right stirrup and sit down. Got it? The student: what's a stirrup? We instructors take a lot of things for granted which we think of as simple and basic, but they're only simple if you already know how to do them. We're talking horse, but they're seeing frog. Meaning the horse's beat. We must also take into account how people learn: visual, auditory, kinesthetic, and then decide the best way to communicate our message clearly and correctly to each individual so that she will grasp it most easily. We must be willing and encourage the student to be willing to go back when necessary to correct a weakness and be willing to give it the time it takes. Now, Kim is going to help me demonstrate the difficulties of communicating and how to overcome them, I hope. Depends on how difficult she decides to be. It can be surprisingly difficult to explain some simple thing that we all know how to do, but let's try it. Okay. This is a coat on a chair, and I'm going to teach her how to put on the coat. She comes from a society where they don't apparently wear coats, so she doesn't wear coats.
I grew up in Texas.
Okay, Kim, put the coat on. That did. Put that on. Well, that's not quite right. Let's put it down and try it again. All right, let's pick the coat up first. And then we want to pick it up by the collar. Okay, let's go back. This is the collar. I'm going to stand over here so it's like something. This is the collar. These are the sleeves. Okay, you want to take, you can repeat after me. Collar, right sleeve, left sleeve, back, and front. Okay, pick the coat up by the collar. Okay, turn it around. Not quite. Let's try it again. Let's put it down. We'll start again. Pick the coat up by the collar. Hold it in both hands. Hold the collar in both hands. And turn it around this way. That's it. No, I'm sorry. Turn it only halfway around so the inside of the coat is facing. Very good. Very good. Okay. Now put your right arm in the sleeve. Not quite. let's take it out. Very good. Now put your right arm in the right sleeve is this one. I know it's hard to tell. This is the right sleeve. Put your right arm in that sleeve. There we go. Now pull all the way up. Good. Okay. Now I'm going to help you with this. I can help my husband with this. I can help you with this. reach around behind you, and I'll help you put your other arm into the seat. Find a seat here. I'll help you. This is very hard to find. There we go. Put it on. And there we are. You have the coat on. You did very, very well. That was excellent. We'll do very well. Then next week we'll talk about zippers and buttons. But you can see that really. Thank you, Kim. That was wonderful. You can see that. I mean, this is something we all know how to do, and yet when we first started playing with this, it's a lot more complicated than you think. Well, there we are. I started out by making some ill-advised assumptions, but because I observed the results and took responsibility for showing the student how to solve the problem, the lesson ended successfully. I mean, didn't just yell at her and say, do it again. The lesson ended successfully. That's how students like to feel at the end of a lesson, that they have accomplished something, no matter how small, and added to their experience and knowledge. That should be the desired impact of the lesson, accomplishment and progress. Now that we've established the overall goals and talked about some basic essentials of teaching, I'm going to finish with an overview of the things I would cover in a first lesson. My goal is to start the foundation from which the student will begin to realize her expectations. The lesson will be built around the three basics, which are, in order of importance, building a good relationship, that is an equal partnership based on mutual trust, respect, and love between the rider and the horse. Learning to be on and around the horse in a way that is comfortable and non-threatening to both at all times. And learning to communicate with the horse, which begins with learning to listen to him. I want to begin this process by, as far as possible, overcoming her innate fears, the fear of the horse himself, the fear of being on him, right away. First, we deal with her fear of the horse himself, using something approximating the following routine. Approaching and greeting the stalled horse from outside the stall. Now, I'm taking her into the stall. How would you like to go to a cage with a tame bear? I mean, the beginning of the safety talk. Positive, emphasizing that most problems arise because horses are large and can move quickly, not from aggression. Then I put the horse on the cross ties. I show her how to stand beside him while staying centered and grounded. It's amazing how many people will stand by a horse like this. They'll stand ungrounded, and then the horse is tense and they're tense. And I teach her that she can step quietly away. If she thinks the horse is going to move, she can just take a step backwards and take a step forward again. And stepping quietly away when he picks up a foot or moves. How and where to put her hand on him. Don't pat him on the face first. Point out his blind spots and his physical responses to her presence, his ears, his tail, whatever. Start her thinking about that. Show her how to position yourself for grooming. I like them to face the end they're working on so they will see what's happening there. I assist her to walk around him to the other side. She's walking on the front. I showed her lift up the cross ties so that she's being considerate. Throughout this, she is being continually reminded by her own actions that she must consider the horse and his needs in order to gain his confidence. This builds her confidence because she will realize that by simple moves, she can begin to gain control of the situation without having to be controlling. Now we're ready to address her second major fear, that of being trapped on the horse. The approach is fairly simple. I tell her that the first thing she's got to learn to do is to get off. That's so that her body realizes that it is quite possible to get safely and easily from the top of the horse to the ground. Once it knows that, it will worry a lot less about falling. The horse needs enough mane to hang on to and wears nothing but a halter and lead rope for this exercise only, to make it easier to slide off. On a saddle or with a bareback pad, each leg tends to get stuck up there. I demonstrate the mount and dismount myself first so that she can see that it isn't very difficult. I choose the simplest way for her to mount and still feel balanced and confident, using a mounting block or a leg on or a combination. I use baby steps to prevent her from hurrying to get on. Most people, when you go to pick them up, they're trying to get that leg over, or, they're halfway up and they're trying to get their leg over. And I make them, if they do that, I drop them. And then I say, okay, now you got to wait and let your leg hang down and work and get that. That's because that's another aspect of the fear. Your body is reacting, saying, we're going to get up here, we're going to get up here where it's safe. The emphasis on staying in control of her body and centered over either the block or the horse throughout. So when she's using a mounting block, she's on the block, and then she gets her center. From there, she goes right from being centered over the block to being centered over the horse. As soon as she's on, after asking permission, I place my hand on her lower thigh to stabilize her. I take her through the first 5 of the 7 steps. So that's growing, shake out, breathing, soft eyes, longitudinal, center, teeter-totter. To release more tension and also to distract her from any fears she might have with sitting up there. By the way, the shakeout gets those tense thighs away from the horse right away, too. And I'll even take her leg and help her shake it. If I need to move the horse away from the mounting block, I warn her and move him the shortest possible distance and in a straight line. And we're ready for the dismount. The hardest part for the dismount for most people is getting the right leg over the horse's back, because they tend to slide off before they get the leg over, and the other leg grabs and they hang it off. So I assist her with this while helping her stay centered. I may also have an assistant on the landing side to make sure that her first landing is successful. Then we go through the whole routine once more, hopefully a little faster, but still with the emphasis on balance and centering, and that's the lesson. I compliment her success and include the horse by giving him some sort of reward so that she takes that into account as well. At this very early stage, I focus on the smallest details, trying to get everything right so that the student feels really successful. At the same time, I am teaching her the importance of detail in her own thinking, so later she will think that way when she meets a problem. If we do this with every student in every situation, each one will feel successful. Just as important, the horse will also feel successful, since we will be praising him and considering him. And he will not be asked for responses that he might find difficult or impossible. And you, the instructor, will feel the most successful of all, because it will have been with your guidance that the other 2 were able to achieve that success. Thank you.